Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Levitt, and I'm the Director of Training at the Feeling Good Institute. And I'm really excited to start our upcoming course together. I hope that you'll learn a lot, and I also hope that you'll jump in and learn lots of skills through the art of practice. So this short video that I'm making is to teach you a little bit about how we practice and give feedback at Feeling Good Institute. So I'll talk to you about practicing skills using role play, and specifically giving and receiving feedback so that you can solidify the learning that you're going to be doing in this course. So why do we think it's important to practice and give and get feedback? So we all know, not just in the field of psychology, but in general, in sports and music, that the only way that you can get better at a skill is by practicing. That passive learning is not going to get you better, that watching workshops and going to CEs, but not actually having to practice and get feedback on the skills is not going to help you to improve. On the other hand, if you do practice and you commit yourself to lots of practice and getting feedback, you can hone in on specific areas and improve them. You can also build confidence in specific areas that you're doing well. And practice is a great way to make good use of our group time together. So every time that we meet, I'll do some didactic teaching for about 45 minutes. Then I'll actually do a live demonstration for you. I'll use a role play with another therapist, and you can see me practicing and getting feedback and improving my skills. And then we'll break into dyads for about 30 minutes so that you can practice the skills that you're learning. Then we'll come back together at the end of the class for some Q&A, so you can try it out and then come back and ask me questions. When you jump into your dyads to practice, I want you to introduce yourself to your partner, but then I want you to get started right away. You're going to choose who in the dyad is going to be the patient and who's going to play the role of the therapist. The person that's the therapist is going to practice the skill that you learned that day. And the person who's in the role of the patient is going to write down everything that the therapist says. This part is super important. If you don't take notes and you don't write down what the therapist says as close to verbatim as possible, you're not going to remember what the therapist said, and you're not going to be able to give good feedback. So after the therapist kind of delivers the skill and the patient is writing it down, you're going to stop and the patient is going to give the therapist feedback. And I'm going to show you in a minute how I want you to give feedback. And then the therapist is going to receive that feedback. They're going to try hard to sort of integrate the feedback, and they're going to try one more time, get a little more feedback, and then you're going to have a chance to reverse roles. So the person in the role of the therapist becomes the patient, or the person giving feedback. And then the person who was the patient now gets to practice in the role of the therapist. So importantly, if you remember what I just said, after you get feedback, you're going to get a chance to try again. And in that second practice is where we really hope that the specific feedback that you got from your partner, you'll integrate and you'll try to do it just a little bit better that next time. So that feedback is integrated and new skills are acquired during that second practice. So again, I stress the importance of note-taking, which is super critical for giving good feedback when you're in the role of the patient. So you're going to write down everything the therapist says. And by the way, we think it's also critical for doing good therapy too. So you might as well practice now. This is an example feedback form. This isn't actually a form from our course, so we won't be practicing these particular skills. But this is what every feedback form will look like. So every week you'll have a different skill that I want you to practice during your practice breakout dyad session. And the feedback form will always look like this. You can put the therapist's name and the patient's name. You're going to write down exactly what the therapist says when you're in the role of the patient. So this feedback form is filled out by the patient, right? By you, the therapist playing the role of the patient. You're going to write down everything the therapist says. The points that you're supposed to be kind of covering, like the key points or the key ideas, I'll highlight here on the bottom. So you can kind of check them off as you're going along. And then the scale here is from 1 to 8. So we have little anchors at excellent, good, kind of needs work, needs more work. So you as the patient can check in and see, is the therapist delivering the skill using these different criteria? And you can give your therapist a score. Also, the therapist is, you in the role of the patient, after the therapist delivers a skill, you're going to stop the role play and you're going to say, okay, time for feedback. Now, therapist, what grade would you give yourself? Would you give yourself an 8, a 7, a 6, a 5? So the therapist gets to grade themselves. So they'll say, I would give myself a 6. And then the patient says, well, you know what, I would give you a 7. Here's what I really liked about what you did. And you give very specific feedback. I liked when you said this. I liked that you delivered a carrot. I liked that you offered empathy, etc. And those will all be skills that should be listed here and here. And then you're going to say, here's what I think would make for a higher grade, or here's where I think you could improve. Now, again, you want to be very specific. I noticed that you didn't dangle a carrot, or I noticed that you didn't end with a question, like depending on what the skill is that you're supposed to be practicing. So I would have liked it better if you did A or B or C. Now I want to talk to you about giving feedback. So these are the steps I just mentioned. What grade would you give yourself, the therapist? I would give you a grade of, so don't skip that part. Here's what I liked, specific skills you used well. Here are a few things that you missed, if the therapist did miss it, or things that I think might use improvement, and you can sort of spell those out. Again, we want you to be specific. We want you to be warm and kind, but pinpoint specific areas to improve, or even demonstrate what you would have liked to have seen. Now, this is really important. I want to talk to you about a number of things that we consider kind of unhelpful feedback. So if you're not specific, if you kind of say, yeah, I think that was pretty good, the therapist doesn't learn anything. They don't know what was good, what wasn't good. So you want to be really specific in your feedback. Another piece of feedback that's really not helpful for this course is to give feedback on skills that are not taught in this course. So remember, the practice is to integrate the skills that I'm teaching in the course. So if you say something like, I noticed that you didn't ask them about their childhood, but that's not at all a skill that I'm trying to teach, that's not going to be really helpful to the therapist, because we're all going to come in with different skills and different styles. So I don't really want you to get off track saying, you know, what I really like to do is this, or how I really like to deliver things is this. I really want you to try to stay true to what I'm teaching and give feedback based on that. And that's because that's really the only thing that's fair to the therapist, right? You're both here learning the same material, so please give feedback on the material being taught in the course. What's also unhelpful is going back and forth in a dialogue. Well, what about this? Well, maybe you could do it this way. Well, should I try it this way? If you continue to go back and forth, you'll end up spending a lot of time in conversation, and we want you to try to jump right back into practice. Another thing is giving too much critical feedback. Even someone with a really healthy ego is going to have a hard time if you just layer on too many negatives. So pick what you think is most important for the therapist to practice and change. Another problem is taking too much time. So we all tend to talk a lot, myself included, when we're nervous. And so instead of going on and on, aim to speak for maybe 30 seconds when you're in the role of the patient giving feedback. I do not want you to time yourself, but you figure if you aim for 30 seconds, you'll probably talk for a minute and a half, and that's probably good. So that's all I have to share with you. Let's put that back screen on there. So I'm excited to learn and grow with you. I think the feedback and the practice is probably the most important part of the learning that you'll go through in this class, and I hope that you'll dive in. We like to say, check your egos at the door. That means let's not try to be awesome or impressive or even excellent. Let's come with a beginner's mind where we say we've all got lots to learn, myself included. Let's try and be kind of open and learn from our partner and not be defensive. And that's going to help you get the most out of the course. I really look forward to learning with you soon.